Well, hello, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon. This is Theresa Strong. I'm Director of Research Programs for the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research. I really appreciate everyone joining us today to hear about the new grants that we've funded in the second half of 2018. And I'm joined today by Jessica Bohanowicz, the Associate Director of Research Programs, and she is going to be helping moderate the questions. Before we start talking about our grants, I do want to mention the clinical trials that are ongoing for PWS. Excuse me. We have quite a few clinical trials that are open or about to be open, many throughout the United States. There's some in Europe as well. And just a reminder, please, to be thinking about these clinical trials, to be evaluating whether they might be something for your loved one with PWS to be enrolling in. It's a really amazing time in our community with all of these potential therapies on the horizon, but the only way we're going to know if these therapies work and are helpful in our kids with PWS is if we actually get these trials done. So please keep up to date on that. There's medication trials as well as non-drug studies, all of which you can participate in, and it's really important for everybody to participate in a way that they are comfortable with and in a way that they can if we're going to get all of this done. Towards that end, I would encourage you to visit the clinical trials page on FPWR. Susan's been working really hard to keep this up to date and making sure it provides all the information you need to understand the clinical trials that are going on, where they are. We have a sign up for the clinical trials alert, so you can get that in your email. We have a frequently asked questions that talks about, what are the questions you should be asking before enrolling in a clinical trial? What should you talk with your doctor about? What should you talk with the study team about? We have some videos about clinical trials in general, and again, some common questions. So a lot of resources on this page, as well as a map to show you where the clinical trials are. Susan is constantly updating this as new sites open. So many of the studies are just getting underway and they just have their first few sites, and they'll be adding sites as we go. So please visit this page often and look for clinical trials in your area. Even in places that we haven't had clinical trials before, I think we'll be seeing some new sites opening. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is many of the pharmaceutical companies will provide support for travel. So if you need to travel a little bit, you should talk with a study coordinator at your closest site and see if they'll provide some financial support for you to go to that clinical trial. So, so again, clinical trials really have the opportunity to change PWS as we know it, and it's a really exciting time for us all to be involved in this process. The other thing I would ask that everybody in the PWS community consider joining is the Global PWS Registry. We're really starting to use the registry now to understand aspects of natural history. We have many of our investigators in academic centers now mining that data to look at sleep, GI issues, seizures, all of this. And really the more data that we have in there, the better picture we get of all the complications that can occur in PWS and what we should be studying. So please consider enrolling in the Global Registry. The site is right here. It's supported by NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders. We're using the registry in addition to understanding the natural history of PWS to inform patient perspective in the drug development and approval process. So for example, by documenting, how difficult PWS is on an entire family with respect to financial impact and emotional impact. And having documentation of that is going to be really important as we move, hopefully, to having new drugs approved and looking to get insurance companies to pay for those drugs. So, having a real well-developed packet of, how a drug might improve the life of the person with PWS and their entire family will be important. And then finally, for those of us who are in the United States, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, and who have kids that are age 5 and up, there's an opportunity to enroll in the Path for PWS Natural History Study. And this is a study that goes through the registry and is going to document the serious medical events that occur in our population, which is really important to know. We need to know, what are the problems that are happening to our kids that are sending them to emergency rooms and the ER, and, really get a handle on that. And the nice thing is it's conducted through the global registry. You don't have to go anywhere to enroll, and you can participate in other studies as you're enrolled in Path for PWS. This is a natural history study, so there's no therapy. It's just looking at the medical problems that occurred in our population. And so you can look at that on the Path for PWS website, and it gives a lot more information on that. Okay, so that's the situation with the clinical trials. That's sort of the commercial for clinical trials before we get into the new grants. And so most of the webinar today will be focused on the new grants that we funded in the second half of 2018. And this diagram shows the drug development pathway, which goes all the way from research and discovery through preclinical development. Those are the studies that need to be done before a drug can be tested in humans. Then clinical development and the post-approval phase when we have an approved drug. And FPWR has put in a number of programs to support different aspects of this research all the way across the spectrum. That's the topic for other days. Today, we're going to talk about the grant program, which supports innovative or exceptional opportunities all the way across the spectrum. So most of the grants that we give really have to do with the discovery phase, better understanding PWS, but we also give grants all across the spectrum, from early clinical trials to looking at how best to use existing medications. And the grant program really has been the foundation of our foundation. We have invested now almost $12 million in PWS research and have supported over 150 research projects in 13 countries. And this has resulted in a large number of publications, which are really important because that's how scientists learn from each other and build the knowledge about PWS. So this program has supported studies on gene function. What are the genes in the PWS region normally supposed to do, and why, when we lose them, do we get PWS? What is the basis of hyperphagia, or that really intense appetite in PWS? What are some new targets for drug development, and all the way through doing early stage clinical trials and optimizing clinical care. And importantly, the projects that start in our grant program, oftentimes they're kind of seed funding for larger projects that can then be supported by, for example, in the US, the National Institutes of Health, or picked up by pharmaceutical companies or other larger granting agencies than FPWR. And so the FPWR supported grants have led to an additional $15 million, more than $15 million being invested in PWS research. So this is a really good return on investment for the smaller grants that we're giving. In addition, we've supported the development of new resources, cells and animal models, and data sets that can widely be used by all scientists in the area. And that's a really important aspect of our support, as well as some new drug targets and new candidate drugs and insights into clinical care. And the outcomes, we try to keep you up to date on the outcomes of the grant program on this webpage, the research outcomes webpage, and also through our blog and also through other webinars. So we're not going to focus on those outcomes today. We're going to talk more about the new grants, but please keep your eye on those resources to learn more about what past grants have found. Okay, so we had quite a few grants approved in the second half of 2018, and they're shown all in a mishmash here, 11 of them, and I'll go through them sort of grouped together. And again, if you have questions on any of these grants or anything FPWR related, please go ahead and put those in your chat box, and we'll try to answer those as we go along. So this is the list, and I'll break them down sort of by category. So we have 4 grants that really are advancing PWS knowledge. So this is kind of the discovery and understanding of PWS. And those are shown here, one on oxytocin, one on circadian rhythms, one on the immune system in the brain, and one is an imaging study on kids with PWS. So the first one is a study by actually 2 investigators, Dr. Bourret, down here, and Dr. Muscatelli. And it's looking at oxytocin. We know that oxytocin has shown some promise as a treatment in PWS, but it's clear that we don't quite understand yet exactly how best to use it. So this project is a collaboration between these 2 investigators. Dr. Muscatelli is a geneticist and an animal model expert, and she was the first to describe the oxytocin defect in PWS animal models and show that if you give oxytocin to little baby mice with PWS, that it improves their feeding and their social function and many aspects of their development. Dr. Bourret is a neurobiologist who is studying the development of the brain, including the hypothalamus. And so their goal is to further understand the role of oxytocin on the development of these feeding circuits, cognitive status, and social interactions, and also to advance the understanding of whether there are critical periods in which oxytocin has to be present in order to reap the benefits of oxytocin. So we don't know yet, is oxytocin effective in adults? Is there a particular period in the newborn period where it's best to be administering oxytocin? And those are the kinds of questions that we can ask in a mouse model of PWS. So we like this grant because, we know that oxytocin is deficient in PWS. We know it's important for the development of appropriate feeding circuits, social behavior, cognitive development. And we know that, it makes sense that compensating for a deficiency in oxytocin would benefit kids with PWS. But we really need to understand that mechanism better if we're going to use it as effectively as we can. We also like this because it fosters an important collaboration between investigators with complementary expertise. I'll just mention that these projects came in as separate projects from each of these investigators in a previous grant cycle. And it was the advocate reviewers who noticed that and said, you know what, these investigators should be working together. There's some complementary expertise, and they had different aspects that they were looking at, but it really made sense to bring it together as a single project. And so that's exactly what we did. We went back to each of the investigators and said, there's someone else who's working on something very, very well aligned, complementary to your study. And so they brought it together in this one larger study. So the long-term outcome from this project is we hope to understand how oxytocin might be optimally used to treat PWS. So the second study in the discovery bucket is an assessment of epigenetic circadian rhythm defects in neurons from individuals with PWS. So this is Dr. Ryder, who has been using all the baby teeth that you guys have sent in to derive neurons and then look at how those neurons from individuals with PWS are different than neurons from individuals, typically developing individuals. And we know that circadian rhythm is an important thing, and it impacts metabolism, it impacts cognition, and it's a feature of an entire organism. So the brain has a circadian rhythm, the liver has a circadian rhythm, but you can actually see those circadian rhythms in cells growing in dishes. They actually go through a 24-hour cycle, and it's marked by the methylation of their DNA. And so we know that circadian rhythms are disrupted in PWS. All of us parents know that because our kids are up even as teenagers at 5:30 in the morning, and there's a lot of sleep and waking, and not good solid sleep as typical individuals have. And so Dr. Ryder is going to be looking in the neurons that are derived from these baby teeth and define the circadian rhythm and see if he can see that circadian rhythm defect in those neurons, those cells. So this is, a novel observation about a feature of PWS cells that might contribute to many symptoms. So this disruption in circadian rhythm, again, is impacting, metabolism, it's impacting development, it impacts a lot of aspects of PWS. They're using some cutting edge technology to really study the circadian rhythm of these PWS cells. And they have an excellent collaborative team. So Dr. Ryder is working with Dr. Janine LaSalle, who really defined the circadian rhythm defect in one of the mouse models of PWS. So the long-term outcome from this project is to define the genes that may contribute to the circadian rhythm and defect in PWS, and establish a cell culture that could then be used for drug screening. So you could screen drugs and see if the cells get back on a normal circadian rhythm. The third grant in this bucket is understanding the role of microglia in the PWS hypothalamus. So the microglia are these cells, they're like immune cells in the brain. And there's evidence now that's developed over the last few years in normal brains, or typically developing brains, that if you have too much microglia, if you have sort of an overactivation of the immune system, it is a marker of obesity and poor neuronal health, right? So you need that, that appropriate balance. You don't want inflammation in the brain because that can cause problems. So Dr. Koresh has hypothesized that neuroinflammation might be might promote hyperphagia and obesity in PWS. So she has some evidence that suggests in the mouse model that you do see this inflammation, neuroinflammation. So she's looking at the role of microglia in mouse models of PWS and hopes to better define their contribution to PWS-associated hyperphagia and obesity. And this is really, there's a couple of nice things about this project. Dr. Koresh is an expert in hypothalamic development and understanding inflammation. So she has that expertise that we're not now bringing into PWS research. This is a novel hypothesis, so nobody has looked at this aspect of it. There's evidence now from another group at Cambridge who were looking at human brains, postmortem brains, and also saw the signature of inflammation. So there's good reason to think that it could be going on in PWS. And the nice thing about it is if she's able to show this and we're able to show that this is going on in humans, there are some interventions that might, come to light, medication and diet focused interventions to alleviate this issue. The final in this group of discovery grants is from Dr. Jill Hamilton, who's at the Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto, and she is going to use an advanced imaging technology to look at kids with PWS, and her goal is to try to integrate this imaging with their hormones levels and also neuropsychological testing. So we're sort of just in the infancy of understanding how these aspects of PWS are integrated. And there's some new technology in brain imaging that's being used in typical populations. So we're getting a real sort of baseline of what the brain looks like in the typical populations. And now we can start comparing PWS to that. So this is one of those technologies. So this will build on our knowledge about how brain regions involved in food intake are related to these appetite hormones. Also, she's looking at stress. She's looking at the levels of cortisol in these kids and their neuropsychology using some new technology that hasn't been used yet in PWS. And this is really providing a basis for understanding some of these complex interactions in PWS. And I'll just mention that this is a project that is funded by our partners, FPWR Canada. So the next set of projects, which is the development of new therapies. So we have 3 projects in this grouping, a drug development project, a model development project, and then a gene therapy project. So we kind of span a really nice spectrum of projects there. So the first is cannabinoid 1 receptor blockade to treat hyperphagia, obesity, and metabolic disorders in PWS. And this is actually funding that is going to Inversago, which is a for-profit company. And note that when we invest in a for-profit company like this, when we provide funding, we do have a mechanism whereby if this goes on to, have commercial value, that we get a return on investment on that. So we're not just, giving money to for-profit companies, just so we know that. So the background here is that there was a drug, you may remember there was a drug called rimonabant, and it went on the market in Europe and was used a little bit in the US as well, and it blocked these CB1 receptors. And it showed promise as an anti-obesity approach. So there was, pretty good results with weight loss using this product. And Dr. Angula up in New York also tried this in a very small study in PWS, but unfortunately in PWS and also in the general population, they ran into some psychiatric side effects. So in some individuals, it increased depression and caused suicidal thoughts. And so it was pulled from the market. However, since then, several groups who have been working on this system have noted that, while the initial drug, rimonabant, went into the brain and had some effects there, there are versions of the drug that don't enter the brain but stay in the peripheral organs. So, that are looking at or interacting with receptors on fat cells and in the liver and in muscles. And those effects are quite beneficial in animal models. So they can cause weight loss, they can cause decreased fat mass, they can increase the speed of metabolism, which we know is a big problem in PWS. And so this new generation of drugs is able to have these effects, but doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier, and so presumably will not have the psychiatric side effects. So we know individuals with PWS have disruptions in this system, so this makes it a very good target for PWS. And the goal of this study is to complete the preclinical studies that are needed to show that the drug does not cross the blood-brain barrier, that it stays in the periphery, it has its effect there, and might be a useful drug for PWS. So this is an interesting project to us because this is a drug target that we know has relevance to PWS. There was effect. However, this new version of the drug, this next generation, is expected to have a good improved safety profile. And Inversago proposes that these blockers would be able to treat a wide spectrum of symptoms associated with PWS, including the slow metabolism, hyperphagia, GI issues, so potentially impact a lot of aspects of PWS. And the long-term outcome from this will be a drug that is ready for clinical trials about 1 to 2 years after completion of this preclinical study. And this project was supported by the Store Family Foundation. Another project is to take the first steps of developing a non-human primate model of PWS. So we know that mostly what researchers use now is mouse models of PWS, but of course there's a lot of differences, physiological differences, cognitive differences between rodents and humans. And some of the changes that are most important to our families, like the social interaction, intellectual deficits, they're really hard to model in some of the rodent models. So the goal is to develop a cell line that can be used to create a non-human, a monkey model of PWS and analyze that at the molecular level. So we're interested in this project. It comes from a lab that has done some really stellar work in the area of using CRISPR technology to manipulate epigenetics, so the on-off that is really important in PWS. So they're going to apply some of that novel technology to this project, which is very exciting. They have good collaborations in place if we wanted to go the next step of actually developing the monkey model. And a non-human primate model of PWS would allow a deeper understanding of PWS and allow novel interventions to be explored in the setting of such an animal. And there are being developed monkey models of autism and Rett syndrome, and really there's a lot of value to being able to understand some of the social and cognitive issues there. And the third branch in this group is the implementation of a hypothalamus-specific exosomes to do gene delivery in PWS. So we know all individuals with PWS are missing the SNORD116 gene. That's either deleted or inactivated. And so Dr. Lee at Johns Hopkins is looking at a novel way to replace those genes. And that is using these things, exosomes, which are these small, like tiny pieces of cells that you can load up with your mRNA or proteins. And in this case, they're using little snippets of RNA. And they have some advantages compared to viral vectors. You know, gene therapy often uses viral vectors, which can be pretty efficient, but also run into a lot of can run into safety issues depending on the vector. But exosomes have some advantages as far as safety goes, and also, you know, sort of the stealthiness of them. They can be very sort of quiet to the immune system as a way to deliver genes. So this is a first step in developing exosomes for gene therapy for PWS, and it's really just looking in cell models at exosome development and how we can target those exosomes to the hypothalamus. So we like this because it's a novel gene therapy approach. There's a great collaborative team. They're going to look at what proteins are different in the hypothalamus of individuals with PWS that can be targeted with this approach, but that will also give us information about how proteins in the hypothalamus are different in PWS compared to typical individuals. And the long-term outcome is that this is really a first step towards a gene therapy vector that's well-suited for delivering genes to the PWS hypothalamus. So there's 4 projects in this group, again, pretty diverse in the way they're approaching clinical aspects of PWS. So the first is a newborn screening test for PWS and Angelman syndrome, and actually duplication 15, which is another syndrome that occurs in this region. So we know that most babies now with PWS are being diagnosed in their first year, but there's still, we hear all the time about people who are, you know, getting a diagnosis at 5 years old or 7 years old or 10 years old. And those kids are missing out on all the benefits of growth hormone early on, as well as some of the interventions, other interventions that we have for PWS. So we'd really like for all babies with born with PWS to be diagnosed right away. And that's what this is. This is a newborn screen. So, you know, when your baby's born, they do a heel stick and they look for a number of genetic disorders. Well, we would like that to include PWS, Angelman, Dup15, and Fragile X. Actually, all of those tests can be done sort of in one tube with a test that Dr. Godler has developed. So we gave a year of funding to Dr. Godler to look at feasibility. Could this be done? Number one, we knew it could be done, but the other question is, can it be done on a scale, a large scale, and in a cost-effective manner so that you can actually do it for newborn screening? Obviously, every baby gets a newborn screen, and so the test has to be cost-effective. So it has to be, we have to be able to do it on just a little blood spot from the heel prick, and it has to be cost-effective. So year one showed feasibility of the test at a reasonable cost, between $1 and $3 per test. And so in year two, we are working with the Angelman, Dup15 groups and the Fragile X groups. And the goal is to screen, really do a pilot, see if, you know, using 75,000 newborn blood spots, and this is a group in Australia, make sure that the test is working the way we think it should work. So a cost-effective newborn screen for PWS would ensure that all babies with PWS are diagnosed right away, right after birth, which is so important for, you know, starting them on the right path. Well, it'll also help us by knowing what the true incidence of PWS is. I mean, we say 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20, 1 in 30,000. Nobody knows exactly what the true incidence is, or whether there are people who are still undiagnosed because there has never been a newborn screen. So this is a way to get at that. And by working with these other disorders, the Angelman and Dup15, the test becomes really cost effective, and because it picks up a fair number of kids with these different disorders. So the long-term goal of this is to do newborn screening for PWS in the US and around the world. And this is a nice pilot and a first step towards that. So this is co-funded by the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. So we're providing about $84,000. They're providing about $80,000. We're also working with the Duke 15 Alliance to advance this and to pave the way for it to come to the U.S. and be piloted for newborn screening. And the Angelman syndrome, this was also on our side, it was supported by the Store Family Foundation. And Angelman Syndrome Foundation did a real nice clip of a little video describing the project if you wanted to look at that. The next project is a clinical trial of CBDZ. So CBDZ is similar to CBD, but it does not have THC, which is that psychoactive component, which in theory may be problematic in PWS. It's a slightly different compound, and Dr. Hollander has been looking at it for aspects of autism, including social aspects and reducing irritability, and also thinks that it may impact appetite in PWS. So he's interested in studying CBDZ in the PWS population. So this will be a 12-week treatment of CBD versus placebo in children and young adults. So it will go up to young adults. It will include, I believe, up to age 30 in this study. And it'll measure appetite, behavior, and other aspects of social interaction after use. So we like this because it has the potential to positively impact behavior and hyperphagia in PWS. GW Pharmaceuticals is going to provide the CBDZ, and they're a company that has successfully brought CBD to market, has gotten approval for using CBD in some syndromes that have epilepsy associated with them. The study team, Dr. Hollander's group, is also doing a large autism trial at the same time. So we're kind of piggybacking on the infrastructure that they're building for their large autism trial. And so the long-term outcome of this study will be to evaluate the safety and efficacy of CBDZ in PWS. So another potential treatment option for our kids and adults with PWS. We have one sort of behavioral intervention for PWS, and this is specifically aimed at fathers of adolescents with PWS. Dr. Jan Forster has spent a lot of time understanding the behavioral aspects of PWS, and what she's really noted, as anyone who has an older child or an adult with PWS, is that the behaviors can be particularly challenging during adolescence. You know, dads sometimes have a hard time with this. So this is a particular program, acceptance and commitment training, that has been used with other developmental disabilities to help ease the stress in the family. So this is going to be a telehealth-based intervention with fathers of kids with PWS, and the goal is to develop healthy coping strategies and move away from distress and avoidance as coping strategies. So we like this because we know that taking care of an adolescent with PWS can be very difficult, and it causes stress on the entire family. And dads oftentimes will, you know, they feel the need to fix something, which is not always the best strategy when it comes to dealing with an adolescent with PWS. And we also know that a less stressed dad who's better able to manage the challenges of PWS is going to improve life for the entire family. And Dr. Forster is interested in piloting this in dads, but then expanding it to moms and siblings, and really developing an entire ACT for PWS curriculum that could maybe help ease some of the challenges of navigating through those adolescent years. And I think this is the last one. So finally, we have a trial of an existing medication to see if it improves aggressive behavior in PWS. So this is Womp Athene, which is used for ADHD, and Dr. Deepan Singh, who works with Dr. Angula up in Long Island, I believe, has prescribed it and noticed that for kids with PWS, he did several several individuals with PWS, it seemed to improve aggressive behavior and self-injury. So he was encouraged by this and wants to do a formal trial to really show that, so that we know, A, if it is effective, and then B, if there are any tolerability issues. So really to provide the evidence that families would need to know that this is a good drug for PWS or for their child. So we like this because aggression and lack of impulse control are features of PWS, and in those, it's not every person with PWS shows that, but when they do, it can be a really impact quality of life for the person and also for the entire family. Womp Athene is an approved drug. It's got a well-characterized safety profile, so it's kind of, we know what we should be dealing with. And also, importantly, ADHD medications are being prescribed already to individuals with PWS kind of on an ad hoc basis. So this would provide a single study where we could look at these things more formally and really get a better handle on, what's the best candidate for using this kind of drug, what are the potential tolerability or safety issues that people need to look at. So it'll just be an opportunity to formalize all of that information where everybody can be using it rather than sort of one-off with your doctor. So the long-term outcome is an assessment of safety and efficacy of Womp Athene in PWS. So I believe that's the end of the grants. It was quite the whirlwind, and all of these will be available on the website along with an abstract, a lay abstract, so sort of a summary of what each of these studies is meant to do. And also, of course, you can contact Jessica or I if you have any specific questions,